Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into a really profound journey through time and, honestly, the architecture of human morality itself. The source material we're looking at today places human history on what it calls the scale of truth. It's this philosophical scale designed to make us look way beyond our immediate surroundings, our tribes, and all of our everyday earthly calculations. We usually think of history as this straight, linear path, just a road leading from the past right into the present. But what if history is actually more like a mirror? It brings up a deeply uncomfortable question. What happens when history mirrors itself so perfectly that the roles of victim and perpetrator are completely reversed? Gazing into that mirror really challenges our deepest tribal allegiances, and it forces us to ask if we actually care about justice or if we just care about our own specific group. So, to navigate this mirror, the text establishes a pretty crucial philosophical distinction between an icon and an idol. Think of an icon as a universal lesson. It's a truth that applies to all of humanity and elevates our intellect. An idol, on the other hand, well, that takes something, even a profound horrific tragedy, and reduces it to a tool for political or nationalistic manipulation. It essentially boxes up the truth just to serve a specific group. Keep those two concepts in the back of your mind as we jump into our first historical case study. All right, Section 1, the trenches of Najran, the ancient fire in the desert. Let's step way back to the 6th century, specifically to the desert landscapes of Yemen and the Himyarite kingdom. The mood in the ancient city of Najran is dark, and the whole region is essentially a powder keg of religious rivalries. If we look at the timeline here, we see these early instances of religious persecution popping up around the 470s CE with the execution of a Christian priest named Zikr. Fast forward a few decades to the 520s, and the Himyarite king, Dhunuwas, actually invades Najran after the city refuses to pledge allegiance to him. And this intense political and religious friction tragically culminates in 523 CE with an event known to history as the Trench Massacres. The actual facts of what happened here are just staggering. In 523 CE, around 20,000 people were cast alive into massive burning trenches. The victims were Christians who followed the original message of Jesus Christ, specifically according to the Arian doctrine. And the perpetrator who ordered this brutal mass execution, that was Dhunuwas, the Jewish king of the Himyarite kingdom. So we have a very clear historical event here, Jewish perpetrators utilizing their state power to commit an absolute massacre against Christian victims who simply refused to abandon their faith. Now, this ancient atrocity left such an indelible mark on the region's history that it's actually immortalized in the Quran. Specifically, Surah al-Buruj states, "Condemned are the makers of the ditch, the fire pit filled with fuel, when they sat around it watching what they had ordered to be done to the believers." The source points out that this scripture recorded their suffering not just as some localized political dispute, but as a universal, timeless record of faith standing absolutely resolute against tyranny. Moving on to Section 2, the modern Holocaust, industrial ruins and the 20th century. So the analysis now snaps us forward over 1,400 years. We're leaving the ancient sands of the Arabian Peninsula and arriving in the stark industrial ruins of 20th century Europe to look at another tragedy, one that is incredibly vast in scale but shockingly familiar in its mechanics of human cruelty. This timeline maps out the chillingly systematic progression of the Nazi regime. It starts with the party's rise to power in Germany in 1933, moves to the state-sponsored violence of Kristallnacht in 1938, and then rapidly escalates between 1941 and 1945 into the final solution, which was an industrialized, bureaucratic campaign of mass extermination unlike anything the world had ever seen. The details of the modern Holocaust are, of course, absolutely devastating. Taking place during the Second World War, this genocide claimed the lives of roughly 6 million Jewish victims. The perpetrators in this case were the Nazi Germans, a society that was nominally Christian. But the driving force behind this atrocity wasn't just religious difference. It was this horrific blend of extreme nationalism and biological racism, where the perpetrators viewed their victims as entirely subhuman in order to justify their total annihilation. Which brings us to Section 3, the idol of nationalism and exposing the logical contradiction. When you place these two immense historical tragedies side by side on our scale of truth, it exposes a pretty devastating historical irony. Just look at the mirror image here. In ancient Najran, we see Jewish perpetrators and Christian victims. Fast forward to the modern Holocaust, and we see nominally Christian perpetrators and Jewish victims. The roles are a perfect flip. The source argues that if you view history strictly through the lens of your own tribe, this presents an absolute paradox. So here is the really crucial question. If suffering gets locked tightly in this box of nationalism, meaning a group claims exclusivity to victimhood just based on their identity, how do you reconcile history when those roles flip? Because if a crime is only considered evil when it happens to your group, but it's somehow justifiable or totally ignored when committed by your group, you are trapped in an unbreakable logical contradiction. You're not actually defending justice anymore, you're literally just defending your tribe. To explain this trap, the source material introduces a really profound concept called tagut. A tagut is essentially a false divinity. It's anything that people take way beyond its true nature. So, when historical suffering is manipulated, weaponized, and then used to justify current political oppression or extreme nationalism, it has been turned into a tagut, an idol. The text argues that the primary mission of true philosophy and universal faith is to dismantle these tribal idols, because corrupting the human mind through this kind of tribalism is the very foundation of evil. To break free from this idol, the text points out something fundamental we have to recognize: false beliefs, like the idea that one tribe's pain is somehow superior to another's, divide humanity. It argues that the truth is what reunites us, and that humanity simply has to rise above nationalism. The concept of universal human dignity is presented here as vastly superior to any worldly, earthly considerations. All right, our final section, Section 4, the universal icon, the cosmic perspective of suffering. This is really where the source's argument resolves, elevating the whole narrative to a sweeping, almost cosmic perspective. The text lays out a very clear choice in how we view these human tragedies. If suffering is viewed as an idol, well, then it's just weaponized for national interest and power. But if it's viewed as an icon, the suffering of the Christians in Nazarene and the Jews in Europe becomes a universal cry against earthly tyranny. This iconic view actually transforms the victim's blood into a permanent lesson for all mankind, totally regardless of who happens to be the victim or the perpetrator in any given century. There's a deeply resonant quote included here from the historical figure Huzaifa ibn al-Yaman, speaking about the perpetrators of those ancient trenches. He said, "This judgment applies to them and to whoever does like them until the end of the world." That quote really anchors the entire philosophy of the text we're analyzing today. The moral law does not change based on what year it is or what flag is flying. Tyranny is tyranny, and justice is justice across all centuries. As the text wraps up its analysis of these specific historical events, it leaves us with one final, profound philosophical point. The kings, the dictators, the perpetrators, and the victims, every single participant has already met their creator. The empire of the Nuas and the Third Reich, they've both turned to dust. The overarching lesson here is that earthly powers always fade, and ultimately perfect justice rests solely with the divine. So the explainer leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. History isn't just some dusty collection of dates. It's the mirror of our current reality. The exact same patterns repeat. The roles swap. As we gaze into that mirror today with an awakened mind, are we going to be wise enough to actually learn from the experiences of others? Or are we just going to continue worshiping the idols of our own tribes? The choice of how we read history is totally up to us. Thanks so much for tuning in.